We are taught from a very early age to see ourselves as a continuous improvement project. We are a sketch to be edited, a statue to be sculpted, removing all imperfections until only the masterpiece remains. We live in a culture that arms us for a battle, the war against our own failure. We list them as enemies in New Year's resolution, attack them with self-help books, and plaster them with positive thinking, hoping that with enough effort and discipline, we can finally eradicate them from our personality. I for years was an exemplary soldier in this, a general on my own internal battlefield. I had a detailed map of enemy territory, the procrastination that sabotaged my projects, the oversensitivity that made me feel too much, the insecurity that paralyzed my decisions, the impatience that undermined my relationship. My arsenal was vast. Rigid planners, shouted statements into the mirror, razor-sharp self-criticism, and a huge dose of shame to punish me every time enemy won a battle. I believed that self-transformation was an act of violence, a purge. I needed to amputate these bad parts of me so that my good self could finally reign. But there was a fundamental problem with this strategy. The more I fought, the stronger the enemy seemed to get. The more I embarrassed my procrastination, the more paralyzed I felt. The more I berated myself for being too sensitive, the more things affected me. My civil war was not leading me to victory. It was leaving me exhausted, fragmented, and increasingly distant from the peace I longed for. It was at the bottom of the darkest trench, at the moment of complete surrender, when I no longer had the strength to fight, that a new strategy emerged. A strategy that went against everything I had ever learned. What if, instead of fighting, I tried to listen? What if, instead of trying to annihilate my faults, I tried to honor them? It was the beginning of an armistice, of a peace treaty signed with myself. And it was in this act of laying down my arms that the most extraordinary alchemy of my life happened. I began to honor my failure, and, in a way that my logical mind still struggles to comprehend, they have begun to disappear. In order for you to understand the depth of peace that followed, I must first take you to the noisy and chaotic battlefield that was my inner world. War was not a metaphor. It was my daily reality. I woke up, and even before I had breakfast, the internal general was already reviewing the troops, pointing out the weaknesses and planning the offensives of the day. Enemy number one, the Grand Marshal of the opposing army, was procrastination. I saw her as the embodiment of laziness and lack of discipline. She was the sneaky saboteur who made me leave everything to the last minute, who turned deadlines into monsters of anxiety, and who robbed me of the feeling of accomplishment. My combat strategy was brute force. I created militarized to-do lists with strict schedules for each activity. I used productivity apps that bombarded me with notifications. And when procrastination won, and it always did, I punished myself with overtime, sleep deprivation, and a torrent of self-criticism. You're weak. You don't have discipline. You'll never achieve anything like that. I believed that shame was a whip that would make me walk the line. But the effect was the opposite. Shame paralyzed me even more, creating a vicious cycle of inaction and self-loathing. Second in the enemy line of command was what I called oversensitivity. I was the person who cried in margarine commercials, who felt deeply affected by the energy of an environment, who absorbed the emotions of others like a sponge. The world told me that this was a weakness. You need to be stronger. Don't take things so seriously. You're making a storm out of a teacup. I internalized these voices and declared war on my own emotional nature. My tactic was suppression. I tried to rationalize my feelings, to swallow my tears, to build a facade of indifference. I was proud of the times I managed to look strong and deeply ashamed of the times when a tear escaped. But suppressing emotions is like trying to contain the water of a river with a barrier of sand. The pressure only increases, and eventually the water breaks through, not as a gentle stream, but as a chaotic and destructive flood. My feelings, repressed and not honored, came out in disproportionate ways, confirming my belief that I was, in fact, too sensitive and unstable. And finally, there was insecurity, the silent spy that undermined my defenses from within. She was the voice that whispered, "You're not good enough," before an important presentation. It was hesitation that prevented me from sharing my ideas. It was the constant need for external validation. My war against insecurity was based on the search for external evidence. I collected diplomas, accolades, achievements, as if they were medals to prove my worth. I believed that if I accumulated enough evidence of my competence, insecurity would finally fall silent. But she never kept silent, because insecurity is not cured with external evidence. It feeds on them. Each compliment brought momentary relief, followed by the fear that I would not be able to live up to that expectation the next time. I was building a house of cards on shaky ground, and the exhaustion of keeping everything standing was constant. This civil war was my normality. I didn't know any other way to live, and the result was a fragmented life. There was the good me, productive, rational, secure, that I was desperately trying to be, and the bad me, procrastinating, sensitive, insecure, that I was desperately trying to hide and destroy. I lived in a state of constant tension, because the truth is that the bad me never went away. It was always lurking, and my vital energy was spent not on living, but on policing the boundaries of my own psyche. The turning point, as in many wars, came not from a landslide victory, but from total exhaustion. There came a time when I just didn't have the strength to fight anymore. It was after the failure of yet another project that procrastination had sabotaged, followed by a crying crisis that my excessive sensitivity could not contain, culminating in a wave of paralyzing insecurity. I was on the ground of my battlefield, defeated by an enemy who was, in fact, myself. In that silence of defeat, a new question arose. A question born not of force, but of the most complete surrender. For years, my question had been, how can I defeat these failures? But that day, the question shifted to, what if my strategy is fundamentally wrong? What if these flaws were not enemies to be annihilated? What if they were, in fact, exiled parts of myself, messengers bringing vital information that I refused to hear? What if the war itself was the problem, and not the enemy troops? This line of questioning seemed radical to me, almost a heresy, but I had nothing left to lose. I then decided to try an unthinkable experiment. I would declare a ceasefire. I would sign a unilateral armistice in my internal civil war. Instead of taking up arms every time a glitch appeared, I would sit down with her. I would invite her to a conversation. I would try, for the first time, not to fight, but to listen. I decided that instead of judging, I would try to understand. Instead of trying to eradicate, I would try to honor. Honor! The word seemed strange, almost too sacred to be applied to something I despised so much. But what did it mean to honor a fault? To me, it meant three things. First, acknowledge their presence without judgment. Second, investigate its origin and function with curiosity. And third, to find the legitimate need or positive quality that she was trying to clumsily and distortedly express. It was with this new peace protocol that I approached my first enemy. The opportunity arose a few days later. I had an important deadline, a big, intimidating task. And like clockwork, procrastination appeared. I felt his familiar calling, the desire to do something else, to tidy up the house, to see a video, to search for something irrelevant on the internet. My old general would have shouted orders, forced me to sit in the chair, and flogged me in shame. But my new self, the diplomat of peace, did something different. I stopped. I took a deep breath, and instead of fighting the urge to get up, I stood up. I made a cup of tea. I sat down in a comfortable armchair and started the conversation, as if procrastination were a person sitting in front of me. Okay, I said silently to myself. You're here, I see you. And this time I'm not going to kick you out. I want to understand. Why do you show up just now when I have something so important to do? I was silent, listening to the answers that bubbled in my mind. The first response was the voice of fear. What if I don't do a good job? What if the result is mediocre? What if I let people down? It is safer not to start than to start and fail. Wow, that was a revelation. My procrastination was not laziness. It was armor. It was a protective mechanism, forged by my perfectionism and my deep fear of judgment. She was trying to protect me from the potential pain of failure. It was an act of self-preservation, albeit dysfunctional. I continued the conversation. Okay, I understand you're afraid, and what else? Why? This desire to do things that have nothing to do with work. And the second answer came from a deeper and more tired place. It was the voice of exhaustion. I'm tired. I need rest. I need time without pressure, without goals, without the need to perform. I need some time to just be. This second revelation was even more profound. My relentless pursuit of productivity had created a gigantic deficit of genuine rest and leisure. Procrastination wasn't just an escape from work. It was a desperate search for rest, the only way my system could find to claim the recovery time I consciously refused to give. At that moment, my heart was filled not with anger at my failure, but with immense compassion. Procrastination was not a villain. It was a part of me that was scared and exhausted, using the wrong tools to try to take care of itself. And then I honored her. To honor the fear of failure, I said to myself, it's okay to be afraid, and its value is not linked to the perfection of this work. Your courage is in trying, regardless of the result. And I redefined the task, not as a test of my worth, but as a practice of courage. To honor the need for rest, I took my schedule and for the first time scheduled breaks. I scheduled time to do nothing. I gave my need for rest a rightful place in my life, rather than letting it hijack my work time. After this conversation, this peace negotiation, something extraordinary happened. I returned to my desk, and the paralyzing resistance had subsided. The monster of procrastination, now seen, heard, and honored, had transformed. He had not completely disappeared, but he had lost his power over me, because I was no longer at war with him. I was working with the wisdom he brought me. By honoring my failure, I have not strengthened it. I integrated it. And when he integrated it, it began, paradoxically, to disappear. After my first successful peace negotiation with procrastination, I gained the confidence to approach the second, commander of the enemy army, a figure who, for years, caused me a deep shame, my oversensitivity. If procrastination was a saboteur, sensitivity was, in my eyes, a traitor. It was the part of me that refused to be strong, that cried at inappropriate moments, that felt emotion, my own and others, with an intensity that seemed disproportionate and, frankly, embarrassing. My war against it was a campaign of brutal repression. I saw it as a fundamental weakness, a character flaw that made me vulnerable and unstable in a world that rewarded cold logic and emotional control. My tactic was invalidation. Each time I felt her emerge, I attacked her with an internal monologue of contempt. Stop being so dramatic. No one else is reacting like that. Control yourself, this is ridiculous. I tried to lock her in the basement of my psyche, hoping that without light and without air, she would eventually die. But like any wronged prisoner, she did not die. She only became more desperate. And her escape attempts were even more explosive, resulting in bouts of crying or anxiety that seemed to confirm my belief that she was, in fact, dangerous and uncontrollable. My armistice invited me to a new approach. Instead of locking her in the basement, I invited her into the living room. The opportunity for our first peace conversation came one evening while I was watching a movie. It was a particularly moving scene, and I felt the familiar wave rising in my chest, the eyes burning, lump in my throat. My conditioned reflex of years was to fight, to swallow, to distract myself. It's just a movie, my logical mind scoffed. But this time the diplomat intervened. Okay, I said to myself. Let's just allow it. What happens if, for once, I don't fight it? I relaxed the muscles in my jaw, which were tense in an attempt to contain the emotion. I let the tears come, and as they came, I started the conversation. Sensitivity, I see you. Are you here? And instead of judging you, I want to ask you, why does this scene affect you so much? What are you seeing here that is so important? I kept watching the movie, but with a new layer of attention and inward-looking attention, and the answer came with surprising clarity. My sensibility wasn't just reacting to the story on the screen. She was reacting to the universal truth behind the story, the pain of loss, the beauty of connection, the human yearning for belonging. She wasn't being dramatic. It was resonating with the deep tapestry of human experience. I continued to investigate. And on a daily basis, why do you feel so overwhelmed in environments with many people? Why can someone's words affect me for hours? And again, the answer emerged from the silence of acceptance. Because I am an antenna. I pick up on the subtle frequencies that the logical mind, occupied with facts and data, misses. I feel the dissonance between the words a person says and the emotion they actually feel. I notice the unspoken sadness in a room, the contained joy, the tension in the air. I am not a system failure. I'm a sharper perception system. That was the epiphany. My oversensitivity was not a weakness. It was a poorly understood and poorly managed superpower. It was empathy. It was intuition. It was an ability to read the world on a much deeper level than the surface. The problem was never the sensitivity itself, but my brutal judgment of it. By labeling her as bad, I had never given myself the chance to learn how to use her as the powerful tool she was. I was trying to use a high-precision telescope as a hammer, and then complained that it was fragile and useless. So I honored her. To honor his wisdom, I began to treat my emotional reactions not as hysteria, but as information. When I felt discomfort in a situation, instead of holding back, I would ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me about this environment or this person? I started using my sensitivity as a guide, an internal navigation system. To honor its permeability, I began to learn about energetic limits. I learned to protect myself in chaotic environments, not by suppressing what I felt, but by visualizing a filter, allowing me to feel without the need to absorb. The flaw of oversensitivity began to fade, but I didn't become a cold or indifferent person. On the contrary, the emotion, now honored and no longer repressed, could flow more smoothly and balanced. Emotional flooding became rare because the river now had a natural course to follow. Oversensitivity has become my greatest strength in relationship, allowing me to connect with others on a level of depth and compassion that my former strong self could never achieve. I was no longer a soggy sponge. I was an emotional compass, and I learned to navigate with its magnetic needle. Finally, it was time to confront the silent spy, the most cunning and persistent of my failures: insecurity. This was perhaps the most difficult battle because insecurity did not fight openly. It operated in the shadows, whispering doubts, poisoning my achievements, and keeping me in a state of chronic need for external validation. My war against her, as I mentioned, was a relentless search for evidence. I believed that if I accumulated enough degrees, accolades, and successes, I could build such a solid case of my own competence that the voice of insecurity would be forced to fall silent. But it was a cruel paradox. Each external achievement, instead of curing insecurity, only raised the bar. Success did not silence her. He only gave him more material to terrify me. "You were lucky this time," she whispered. "Can you repeat the feat? Now expectations are higher." The armistice invited me to stop looking for evidence on the outside and to start investigating the nature of the voice on the inside. The opportunity for the conversation came when I was invited to give a lecture on a topic that I mastered. The invitation itself was validation. My system's immediate reaction was an icy wave of insecurity. Who am I to talk about this? There are much more qualified people. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I'll forget everything. They will find out that I am a fraud. Would my old self have entered a cycle of frantic preparation, trying to memorize every word, or would it have sought out reassurance from friends? "Do you think I can do it?" But my new one did something different. I stepped away from my desk, took a deep breath, and turned to the trembling voice inside me. "Insecurity, I hear you. You're afraid. Thank you for caring about me. But I need to understand. What exactly are you trying to protect me from?" I listened carefully, and the answer that came was not about incompetence. It was about the exposure. The fear was not that of not knowing enough. It was the fear of being judged, of being rejected, of being seen as imperfect. Insecurity was the guardian of my vulnerability, an overprotective and somewhat clumsy guardian, who believed that the only way to keep me safe was to keep myself small, invisible. I continued the conversation. "And why do you care so much about the quality of what I do? Why do you put so much pressure on me to be perfect?" And the second revelation emerged. Underneath the fear, there was a deep desire. Because I care. Because this work is important to me. Because I want to do a good job, I want to contribute, I want people to benefit from what I have to share. And then, I got it. My insecurity was not proof of my inadequacy. It was the distorted manifestation of two of my noblest qualities: my humility, the awareness that I am not the world's foremost expert, and my deep commitment to excellence, my desire to serve and to do high-quality work. Insecurity was the voice of my conscience and my passion, but filtered through a lens of fear. So I honored her. To honor humility, I acknowledged, yes, it's true, I don't know everything, and that's okay. My intention is not to be perfect, but to be authentic and useful. To honor my commitment to excellence, I said, "Thank you for reminding me of the importance of this work. I will use this energy not to paralyze myself with fear, but to prepare myself with diligence and affection as a way of honoring the opportunity and the audience." The failure of insecurity has begun to lose its paralyzing power. It did not disappear, but it transformed. Instead of a self-sabotaging voice, it became a reminder. Reminder to stay humble, to keep learning, and to always prepare with the utmost care and intention. The energy that once paralyzed me was now propelling me toward a more mindful and centered preparation. Insecurity has been transmuted into conscientiousness. The journey into my own battlefield has taught me the deepest of truths. There are no enemies here. The parts of us that we label as flaws, as weaknesses, as shadows, are not monsters to be exterminated. They are exiled parts of our own psyche, frightened and misunderstood children who have been locked in the basement for not fitting the idealized image of who we think we should be. The war against ourselves is, by definition, a war doomed to failure. For every attack we launch is an attack against a part of our own totality. True healing, true strength, comes not from amputation, but from integration. The path to peace is not eradication, but reconciliation. Honoring our failures is the alchemical act of bringing these exiled parts back home. It is a process of compassionate listening, curious inquiry, and profound reinterpretation. It's discovering that our procrastination can be a cry for rest and security, that our sensitivity can be our empathy and intuition radar, that our insecurity can be the guardian of our humility and our commitment. When we do that, something magical happens. Failures do not disappear in the sense of being annihilated. They disappear the way the caterpillar disappears when it becomes a butterfly. They transform. Energy that was once spent on self-sabotage and inner conflict is released and reintegrated, becoming a source of power, wisdom, and authenticity. The lead of our imperfections is transmuted into the gold of our integrated strength. Today, I invite you to a small armistice, a temporary ceasefire in its internal war. Pick a flaw that bothers you, one that you've been struggling to fix for years. Next time she shows up, instead of taking up arms, try something different. Stop, breathe, and with genuine curiosity, ask her a silent question. What are you trying to tell me? What need of mine are you clumsily trying to meet? Just listen to the first answer that comes without judgment. Write it down if you want. This small act of listening is the first step to turning an enemy into an ally, to turn your civil war into a peace negotiation table. What about you? What flaw of yours do you suspect may be hiding an important strength or message? Share your reflection in the comments. Your courage in looking at your own shadow can light the way for someone else. If this reflection has offered you a new perspective on your own journey, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can continue to explore the paths to a more whole and compassionate life. See you in the next video. And remember, we are not our light or our shadow. We are the whole of heaven which has the courage to contain both.